Number 10. Ninja of HEISEI. In 2017, an elderly man from Japan made international headlines after stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of goods from local homes and shops in Osaka. In footage captured by closed-circuit television cameras, 74-year-old Mitsuaki Tanagawa can be seen decked out in a full black cloth covering his body. Truly a thief in the night, he then passes between buildings and runs on walls. He hits his marks and then disappears without a trace. For quite a while, no one knew who this elusive bandit ninja was, until his mask slipped off. The moment a glimpse of his face was seen in security footage, police were able to identify the old man. Investigators say they watched him for a few days to pick up on his patterns. During the day, he'd waddle about like any other grandpa would, but at night, it was like he turned into a completely different person. They finally arrested him when he tried to rob a store, and they had solid evidence of his shenanigans. Once in custody, he admitted that he never actually thought that he'd get caught. Number 9. AOP Mob. What would you do if you lost over $2.3 million? Would it drive you insane? Would you be willing to do anything to get it back? In 2009, a group of retired individuals in Germany abducted their financial advisor after losing millions in an economic crisis. 56-year-old James Anburn was kidnapped outside his Speyer home. A group covered his eyes and head with a bag, then tied him up using tape before stuffing him in the trunk of a car. While remembering the incident, James says his abductors took their time apprehending him and were clearly out of breath as they bound him. Some of the perpetrators included 74-year-old Roland Koenig, 60-year-old Willie Deemer, and more. James was kept bound for 4 days while his elderly ex-clients tortured him. His treatment including getting punched and slapped in the face, 2 broken ribs, and getting burned by cigarettes. After news of the crime got out, the group was called the OAP Mob by news outlets. The retired criminals had apparently lost money by investing through Digital GlobalNet, Anburn's investment agency. He argued with them for days, repeatedly saying there was nothing he could do about their lost money and that he couldn't control the market. The only reason James was rescued was because he called police instead of sending a message to transfer funds for his abductors. His captors eventually led him outside for a cigarette break, and when he had the perfect chance, he ran away. The OAP Mob members faced 5 years in jail as a minimum punishment for what they did to their financial advisor. Perhaps they thought in their old age that there was nothing more to lose. Number 8. Granny's Ganja. Authorities in Oklahoma were in for a surprise after kicking down the door of 73-year-old Darlene May's home in 2012. They had received a tip that there'd likely be marijuana on the property, but they weren't prepared for just how much there was. A drug ring had operated in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the states that neighbored it for years, but police never knew who the mastermind behind everything was. They had no clue. When they entered Darlene's home, they immediately smelled weed, and after looking inside the woman's bedroom, they found bundles of cash. In total, it was over $200,000 worth, and that didn't include the cost of all the drugs she had either. She also had a semi-automatic pistol and a revolver as well. At first, Darlene kept her cool and told investigators that the money was all part of her retirement, but they didn't buy her story at all, though. Just a few days before the bust, her son Jerry was arrested. He was carrying 2 pounds of drugs and thousands of dollars in cash at the time. It didn't take long for officers to connect the dots and realize Mays was behind the sprawling drug ring and was the biggest dealer in the city. It's unclear what her punishment was based on the information released to the public, but it's likely she was put behind bars. You wouldn't want to mess with this granny, that's for sure. Number 7. Serial Scratcher. Throughout 2018 and into the beginning of 2019, a man named Jose Antonio Vasquez terrorized northern Spain's towns of El Calvario and Vigo. The 79-year-old vandal has targeted over 1,100 vehicles, scratching most of them while they're parked by the street. At the end of 2018, Vasquez was arrested. They conducted a psych evaluation on him to see if there were any underlying issues going on that may have prompted him to vandalize so many cars, but the tests revealed nothing. This doesn't line up with what he told a local television network, though, in an interview. Telecinco approached Vasquez one day and asked him why he did what he did. He only responded saying that he didn't remember scratching any cars and that he had no clue where he was going. After this statement, though, he proceeded to show the reporter how he used coins to leave small scratches on vehicles. On top of this, Jose targeted shops, too. He would stuff the locks of doors full of toothpicks until they were jammed. It's believed that the total property damage he's caused exceeds $500,000. Apparently, Vasquez attacked one of his neighbors when they tried to stop him one day. The old man hit the bystander with a cane, breaking his glasses and even the guy's glasses. If you see Jose on the street, you might want to look the other way. If you know what's good for you, that is. Would you rather find out your grandparents were secretly drug dealers or discover they had once abducted and tortured someone? Tell us what would be more shocking in the comments and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 6. Church shooting. On June 16, 2022, 71-year-old Robert Smith showed up to his church for a potluck intended for older individuals. While there, he pulled out a gun and proceeded to shoot at nearby people. 3 were killed in the fire, including Walter Rainey, Sarah Yeager, and Jane Pounds. All of the murdered victims were over 75 years old. Before the shooting happened, Robert had attended church at the St. Stephen's Episcopal Chapel in Vestavia Hills, Alabama. Infrequently. Whenever he did come, members say he usually sat by himself. The same occurred at the potluck. One of the victims, Walter, saw him sitting alone and invited him over. That's when he pulled out the gun. After a few bullets were let loose, Jim Musgrove, a brave attendee, hit the gunman with a chair in an attempt to get the gun away. It's unclear why Smith went on a rampage, and his criminal history listed no prior violent crimes. The biggest thing he'd done was get a DUI. The lack of reasoning did little to help the grieving hearts of the church's community. At least they can rest easy knowing the madman is behind bars and will soon stand trial for his crimes. Number 5. Toys for Kelly. Even the toughest criminals usually stick to some kind of moral code, whether it lines up with laws or not. But in 2009, 73-year-old Virginia Kelly made a huge mistake when she decided to steal from children. Toys for Tots is a well-known charity that provides toys for underprivileged children, bringing a small piece of happiness into their day. Kelly was the president of her local Latino Foster Parents Association. She took care of 4 foster kids herself and helped overlook the toy donation process for her community. But everyone was beyond shocked when authorities discovered over 11,000 toys spread across 3 separate sites that belonged to Virginia herself. It's believed that she collected the donations and had them sold for profit over the years. When she was caught, Kelly denied all of the allegations, claiming that the program was just getting too many toys. They were coming in faster than she could give them away, according to her defense attorney. She was charged with grand theft paired with embezzlement for holding on to all the toys. Eventually, a court found Kelly guilty and sentenced her to 60 days behind bars as well as house arrest for 120 days. Number 4. Light 'em up. In-laws always seem to be a problem in one way or another for married couples, but for the most part, the days of giving cows and chickens in return for a hand in marriage are over. This doesn't mean dowries no longer exist, though. On March 30th, 2005, Neelam and Sunil Thorat were married. The couple was from Mumbai, and they were overjoyed to start their new life together. There was one problem, though: Sunil's mother, Mangal. The 62-year-old woman had a big problem with her daughter-in-law over the wedding dowry. Neelam's father had already paid the groom's family 1 lakh, or nearly $100,000 worth of golden jewelry, but Mangal wasn't satisfied with this large sum, so she wanted more. Neelam quickly became the subject of torture in her new household. She was treated harshly and even thrown out of the home on 2 separate occasions. Eventually, tensions reached a boiling point. The new bride was beaten up by her mother-in-law, then kerosene was poured all over Neelam's body. After this, Mangal set the young woman on fire. Authorities were notified, and Neelam was taken to Bhatia Hospital to get her wounds treated, but it was all too much. 85% of her body had been covered by burns, and the poor woman died from her injuries. For the insatiable greed and a heartless murder, Mangal was sentenced to spend the rest of her life in prison. Number 3. Donald Winkler. In 2017, an elderly man was receiving treatment for his heart issues at Long Island's Nassau University Medical Center. 83-year-old Donald Winkler wasn't impressed with how he was being cared for, though, so he checked himself out at 1 in the morning. After doing so, he must have realized, hey, how am I supposed to get home from here? But his answer was right in front of him. Instead of calling a taxi or Uber like most reasonable people would nowadays, Winkler decided to hitch a ride from a hospital ambulance. He got into the emergency vehicle, started it up, and drove down the road. He stopped at a 7-Eleven over 3 miles away from the facility, and police caught him red-handed. It's not hard to miss a giant ambulance. Apparently, a medic who worked at the hospital accidentally left the keys in the ignition. Because of this, he'll take responsibility for the mishap, even though it's a common practice to leave the vehicle running while patients are being dropped off. Number 2. FITBIT. Karen Navarro's dead body was discovered in her San Jose home in September 2018. She was found next to a half-eaten pizza slice with a knife in her hand and a cut throat. The 67-year-old victim also happened to be wearing a Fitbit on her wrist. At first glance, detectives believed that this was a suicide case, but after an autopsy revealed multiple stab wounds, murder was much more likely. In case you're unfamiliar, Fitbits are able to track all kinds of data like heart rate, amount of steps, sleep time, and more from the users that wear them. By analyzing this information, police were able to narrow down the suspect list to 91-year-old Tony Aiello, the victim's stepfather. They determined that Karen died while Tony was with her after seeing the exact time her heart rate stopped. It just so happened that Aiello's car was in her driveway at this time too. The evidence did little to persuade some people though. Aiello's defense claimed that another person could have been at the house at the same time. They also pointed at studies that showed Fitbits can inaccurately capture heart reading. It's unknown for sure if Tony killed Karen, and we may never know, because before the case went to trial, the elderly man passed away due to health complications, or perhaps guilt. Number 1, proof is in the pudding. A few years ago, there was a trend sending young people into grocery stores to lick ice cream and put the containers back on shelves. This didn't go over well with most of the internet because users wondered how anyone could be so disrespectful and tamper with food before people bought it. Many chalked it up to their young age, but this next couple is proof that crazy crosses generational lines. In 2010, an elderly couple from Long Island were busted for one of the strangest crimes we've ever heard of. 68-year-old Alexander Clement and his 64-year-old wife Christine often visited their local grocery stores to purchase pudding in bulk, specifically butterscotch and pistachio pudding. Usually the pair would hit up multiple spots in one day, then take everything back home. Once there, they'd empty out all the boxes of pudding and refill them with small plastic bags. After refilling and sealing the boxes with bags full of sand or salt, the couple would take the items back to the stores and ask for refunds. For each box of pudding, they'd usually get about $1.40 back. Considering that they originally bought the items in bulk amounts, this was massive profit for them, and they would have gotten away with it too if only someone hadn't opened up one of the return puddings. A customer bought the item after it was put back on the shelf and complained to the store after opening it. Police later traced the crime back to the Clements and were surprised since the two were pretty well off. It's believed that they may have been suffering from mental health issues due to their old age, or maybe they were just greedy. For their crimes, they faced charges of tampering and multiple counts of larceny. But really, all the proof is in the pudding for the prosecutors in this case. Thanks for watching. Who knew grannies and grandpas had it in them? If you liked today's video, be sure to tell us what you think in the comments and subscribe. We'll see you next time on The Bad Badger.